Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Podcast, episode 80 today. And I am here with my guest, Christina. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on.
What have you been up to today? Anything much?
Yes, if you go to my YouTube channel, people who are listening that haven't heard of my content before, my channel is just Radixverum as it's spelled right there. I've been working on a documentary um, about this big case. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there was back in October of 2020, there were these six guys that were arrested by the FBI, and they said that they had this like domestic terror plot where they were planning to kidnap the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, and that the FBI like came in and foiled this big terror plot. Well, that's not what happened. We learned through the trial that the FBI used a network of informants, 12 informants, and two undercover agents, where they tried to entrap people. Okay. And so my documentary is focused on exposing that, telling the truth about what actually happened. There were actually 13 guys arrested, but not all of them were charged federally. Six of them were charged federally. Several of them were charged in state cases. So that's totally different than the federal trial. But what ended up happening is two of them were forced to take plea deals. One guy took a plea very early on. And I guess his thinking was when you go up against the federal government, you're probably going to lose. The other guy, Caleb Franks, he was going to fight the case. And so he had a lawyer with the five other guys. They all had lawyers, and they had started getting discovery. And this discovery was showing that the text messages between FBI agents, right, where they were kind of saying, like, oh, I need a big terror case before I retire because then I want to go into the private sector and I want to have a private company where I'm going to advise the federal government on cases of domestic terrorism. So they're seeking multi-million dollar contracts with the government. These FBI agents, like, they have their own reasoning for doing this stuff. There were other text messages between some of the informants where it was clear that this was not a plot that the FBI came upon and foiled. This was a thing where the FBI had been watching people online, right? They've been watching guys online that they didn't like, people that were very pro Second Amendment, people that were, against the
Doing
lockdowns.
the typical, like, oh, this guy's a right winger, so we must go after him.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
All
That's
that
exactly
crap.
what it was. One of these guys, they had been watching since 2017. He had a podcast that they didn't like, and he had criticized the FBI on Facebook
What was
because
the
of
name of the guy?
Barry Croft.
Hmm?
Yeah,
What
his
was the
name was
name of
Barry
his
Croft.
podcast that he was
I
running?
I don't remember the name of the podcast, but it was like a very small, obscure podcast. It wasn't even something that like you would think would be a big problem for them. He had maybe a couple hundred people that listened to this like very small, very obscure podcast where he talked about like the Constitution. He talked about like the three percenters, militia groups, stuff like that. But it was nothing illegal. So the FBI had been watching him since 2017, and they didn't like him criticizing them on Facebook. They actually referred to that as having anti-government views, right? So now they call people who question things the government does as an anti-government extremist. So that's what they were doing, right? There were these guys that were kind of in like a Facebook group. They were a militia group called the Wolverine Watchmen, where basically the guys would meet maybe like once a month. They would drink beer and they would shoot guns on their property. By the way,
Would they
totally
would they
legal.
grow like, swords out of their, knuckles like Wolverine does?
No, but it would have been great, right? But it was just like regular working class guys, you know what I'm saying? That just hang out. they drink beer, they barbecue food, and then they have legally purchased firearms, and they would kind of just shoot them on their property, which was legal for them to do. None of that was against the law. So the FBI says, okay, they claim, and this is how they said that they opened their investigation into these guys. They said, well, we had a guy who joined the group, and he saw in an encrypted group chat what the FBI calls threats of violence against law enforcement. But they've never produced any evidence of that, like no screenshots, nothing. So there was nothing to show that that actually happened. That was their pretext, though, for opening this terrorism investigation into these guys. Long story short, the FBI has 12 different informants, all working different subjects, right? Pressuring them each day to try to get these guys to commit crimes. Now, they peg one guy as the ringleader, they claim, a man named Adam Fox. Adam Fox was a mentally ill man living in the basement of a dilapidated vacuum repair shop. He was basically homeless. He had no running water, like no bathroom. If he wanted to brush his teeth, he had to go to the Mexican restaurant next door. And he was very impressionable and very suggestible. So they had 3 different FBI informants, like, working this guy all day, every day, trying to press him to come up with a plan to get the governor or whatever. And this poor guy, like, he was like, oh, yeah.
Did he manage to succeed in getting any help or no?
No, the poor guy was like, the FBI just totally framed him. He was so suggestible. Like, they had an FBI informant would be wearing a wire and would get him to say really dumb stuff. And then they'd use that audio recordings to try to say, oh, look, he's a violent extremist. He wanted to do this, this, or that. He said at one point, like, oh, yeah, we should get that bitch and fly her over the lake on a kite. Like, at no point was that going to happen. You know, it's like nonsense talk. He was high most of the time. They were getting him high. They were supplying him with alcohol. They tried to give him credit cards so he would purchase guns and ammunition, which he declined, even though he's a homeless guy, basically, and didn't have a lot of money. They kept trying to get him to make, like, large purchases of ammunition or firearms. And he kept turning down their credit cards and stuff. It's just such a ridiculous story. But anyways, so there's other guys that the FBI tries to frame. They go as far as to plant explosives on one guy and then arrest him and then claim that he had the explosives.
The FBI's been...
This is what they do.
They do that for 8 years. I mean, they could stop some of the mass shootings that have happened in the past, but they don't. You know, they let them happen. They visit other people's houses, especially in the Buffalo shooter's house. Especially... There was that latest shooter that apparently, was visited by the FBI, apparently when he was threatening to, put his mom on fire or something like that, which was absolutely insane. There was also, this other story, and it's just one popular argument at the moment, Christina, is going along is, should the FBI and CIA be abolished?
Yeah, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I agree.
I think so. Mm-hmm. I would absolutely agree with that. I think especially after everything I've seen, I've gone through all of the court documents in this case. I'm working with one of the guys who the FBI framed. His name is Brandon Caserta. He spent 18 months in prison. He lost everything. Lost his job, lost his bank account, lost his apartment. They destroyed his vehicle because they tear up the car, just in case you have something planted in there or whatever. And so he was acquitted by a jury, though. The jury was like, this guy didn't try to plot to kidnap anybody. He didn't even know these other guys hardly. He was in a group chat. He got invited to a couple training exercises that he was told was doing defensive use of force. So you're training with guns for a situation that could happen, like a hypothetical situation where you need to defend yourself, right? It's defensive training, which is perfectly legal. He never had any illegal guns. He never did anything illegal, never committed a crime. The FBI even admit this because they didn't try to charge him with anything else. The only thing they tried to charge him with was conspiracy to kidnap the governor. But when you go through all of even all of the government's documents, all of their evidence, at no point does he ever say he is participating in a plot to kidnap anybody. He showed up to like 3 of these training exercises, which, by the way, were sponsored and paid for by the FBI. You have FBI undercovers and FBI informants training people. They're the ones running the militia training. And so it's like, what? The government trained this guy and then tried to call him a terrorist for participating in the training that they sponsored and paid for. And it's just nuts. So I had been reporting on the case since these guys got arrested in October of 2020. As soon as I saw this story, I was like, oh yeah, the FBI foils this big terror plot. I know immediately that, like, okay, what really happened, because as you said, the FBI has been doing this shit forever. And every time there's like a mass shooting, every time there's a so-called terrorism incident, there's somehow the FBI is involved. Like, there's an FBI informant involved. They had pre-knowledge and let it happen, or they encourage it. They give people, the means and opportunity to do something that they normally wouldn't have, right? So I know this stuff. I have been, covering this kind of thing for a very long time. So as soon as I saw that, and it's 1 month before the 2020 election, I'm like, I got to look into this. Something isn't right. And then through the course of my reporting on this and following it, it just became more and more clear that the FBI framed innocent men. And 2 of those men are in prison right now. 2 were forced to take plea deals. 2 were acquitted and are totally free. And it just really, there was so much corruption throughout the entire thing, not just with the FBI, but the judicial system as well. The judge was very, very obviously protecting the FBI and the federal government, assisting
pretty much
them,
bought out by, the establishment and the elitists.
Yes, absolutely. And it was so obvious. Like, even the media the mainstream media started questioning it as well. And that's the thing that I find so interesting about this particular case, and why I kind of want to make this what I make my documentary on, to really highlight, like,
what is the name of the documentary?
It's going to be called Patriot Conspiracy.
So how many parts is there going to be?
I don't know yet. We're still in the process of filming everything, and I still have more people I have to interview. So it's going to take time for me to finish it. It might be 2 parts. It might be more, but the story is so big. There's so many people involved, and it's such a long timeline of events. I don't know if I can finish it all in one film, but it truly is amazing. You had even like left-wing publications like BuzzFeed, even they looked at what happened and were like, this doesn't actually appear to be like far-right extremists. It actually kind of looks like the FBI was kind of running this thing.
Well, you don't see that often. BuzzFeed, getting red-pilled in a way.
No,
That's
exactly.
pretty impressive,
So if even BuzzFeed is saying that, right, that shows you that it's not a political thing. First of all, this is something that every single person should care about. It doesn't matter what your politics are. There's certain publications and mainstream outlets like The Guardian, The Intercept. They'll cover FBI corruption, but only if the targets or the victims of the FBI are people they deem worthy, right? So, like, for example, after 9/11, a lot of like indigent, mentally ill Muslim men were framed as, ISIS or Al Qaeda terrorists.
Yeah.
And when that happened, rightly so, these journalistic outlets would look into it and say, hey, the FBI kind of had informants that were pressuring these guys, and they wouldn't have had the means to carry out a terror attack, but the FBI assisted them. And they would call it out and say, yeah, the FBI has been framing these guys. Now they put their spin on it and they say, oh, it's because the FBI is a racist or whatever, which is nonsensical. The FBI has been doing this from the beginning, from their inception. They have been targeting various people. But it's funny that The Guardian, The Intercept, they all reported on the Whitmer kidnapping plot as a legitimate terrorism event. Oh yeah, the FBI are now the good guys, and they foiled these right-wing extremists.
excuse. It sounds like another excuse like the FBI do when it comes to, when they let these mass shootings happen, when they could have pretty much prevented it. They do it to pretty much, so they can pass more gun laws and they can put the New World Order agenda, taking away people's gun rights. And especially, when they let these terror attacks happen, even though it wasn't a terror attack, they're obviously trying to do it so they can take down fucking right wingers and also libertarians
and
also
what it was.
Yeah.
Yes, and frame people, make it seem like there's this big threat of domestic terrorism in America, which there isn't. There's not. Even looking statistically at the FBI's crimes.
Yeah, Katrina, a lot of people around the world, like you were saying, statistically, what facts when it comes, because a lot of the people around the world say that white, terrorism and domestic home terrorism is a bigger threat in America than any other
it's not
threat in America. What statistics can you prove that on, and what is the basics to back up your argument with that?
Well, their recent statistics that they just put out a couple days ago on domestic terrorism, they can only cite 2,000 cases. And this is with 330 million people in America. And guess what? 1,000 of those all stem from January 6th, even though January 6th defendants aren't being charged with domestic terrorism. They're being charged with misdemeanor crimes like parading and picketing in the Capitol. But I just interviewed an FBI whistleblower on my channel 2 days ago. He blew the whistle at the FBI because he said they were inflating domestic terrorism figures, that the FBI leadership was enforcing quotas on them and encouraging them to try to classify things as domestic extremism when it wasn't.
They were especially, like 2 months ago, where they were pretty much, did you see the leak right from Project Veritas, where they were pretty much labeling like the "Don't Tread on Me" flag as extremism, and also the other things extremism. And there was a video by Ted Cruz. I mean, whether you like him or not, some people do like Ted Cruz, and he's a globalist or whatever. But he was literally in the Congress, and he was saying that he was wearing the on his boot that had the Gadsden flag, right? I think that's correct. And he was saying, to them, what are you guys doing? All of that taxpayers' money going onto the fucking, thing that the FBI labeling all of these flags being extremists when in fact they're not. It's absolutely outrageous, and it's insane.
Yeah. It is, and they've been doing this for a very long time. They just slowly, turning up the dial. Now it's like, oh, if you believe in the Constitution and things, are the founding fathers of our country said, they actually call that extremism. They say people that talk about the American Revolution are extremists now, and I'm not making it up.
Absolutely not. Anybody who says that is just, the FBI really has just gone too far.
Yes,
just so unconstitutional.
And now,
Christina, in your researching, studying the FBI, apart from this case that you're working on, what would you say would be the most disturbing story and the most horrific crime against humanity you think the FBI has ever done in history?
Waco.
So what was Waco? What was that?
Waco was a gentleman named David Koresh, lived on a compound. You could call it maybe like a quasi-religious cult, but they were a group of like preppers, right? There were about 80 people living there. They had children. They were kind of stockpiling food, water, weapons, but all that was legal. The guy was selling guns at gun shows, like perfectly legally, okay, to earn money and stuff. And the FBI conducted a siege. First they tried to run informants. They'd sent FBI informants over to try to get him.
What state was this located in?
Texas. In Texas back in 1995. So it's a older story, but I think it highlights really like the nature of the FBI. This guy had done nothing wrong. He hadn't committed a crime. So they send in an informant. They try to get him on something. They tried to smear him as a pedophile. They tried to smear him as like polygamous or whatever. They just come up with their nonsense. And then they conducted a siege at his property, where they burned the entire building down with people inside, including children. They rolled up like military style tanks. They had helicopters flying overhead. It was insane. Look it up. You can see pictures of it. That was an act of war by the FBI on American citizens. And it is stunning to me that
did the FBI agents get arrested? Did any of them?
No, they got commended for this. They get promoted when they do stuff like that.
Wow, that is absolutely.
But this is the scary thing about it, right? Is that they've started using these very militaristic tactics.
And as a guy who's like pretty much from Wales, I heard the stories of like FBI fucking protecting sex trafficking rings in like other countries, and it's so screwed up.
Really?
And this,
wow,
in
other countries too.
Unacceptable. I mean, they should be arrested. They should absolutely, be put to jail for the rest of their lives for doing that. I mean, that's unacceptable.
Yeah, exactly. Truly, it is. And this is, I feel like it's gone to the point too, though, where they've become very emboldened because they got away with this stuff. Ruby Ridge, Waco, Oklahoma City. These were, and I'll cover those cases in my documentary, by the way. Those were PATCON operations. PATCON stands for Patriot Conspiracy. And it was the code name that the FBI gave to an operation that they had very similar to COINTELPRO, which was their infiltrate, disrupt program that they had in the 60s and 70s. That COINTELPRO was geared towards like anti-war leftist groups. It was geared towards like civil rights groups, whatever, like the Black Panthers. They would infiltrate and try to disrupt these groups, get them to do something criminal, and then shut them down.
Yeah, especially when the Black Panthers in the 1960s, held up the Capitol, with shotguns.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Yeah, that insurrection that the left conducted. Yeah, but so the FBI everyone's heard of COINTELPRO, right? Like FBI infiltrating these groups in the 60s and 70s. Well, they had another version of COINTELPRO called PATCON. It was in the 90s. We believe it might have been before that in the 80s. It's not documented yet. As far as we know, it began in like 1992 on paper. But the Patriot Conspiracy PATCON operations, those were basically COINTELPRO, but aimed at the right. So aimed at Christian and militia groups that, again, the FBI infiltrated and tried to take over. And what's interesting about this, too, is that there tends to be connections to the CIA. Because during the 80s, have you heard of Iran-Contra?
Yep, I have.
Okay, so this was when the CIA was arming and funding the Contras, and they were running kind of black ops to fund this stuff, right? So doing things off the books.
Was this a drug trade that was going on with like in Central America and stuff?
Yeah,
and,
that's part of it. Yes,
there was a movie with Tom Cruise. You probably saw that. Like, I think he was playing like this pilot who was pretty much driving the drugs from, I can't remember the name, but it's a good movie. So check it out.
Yeah. Okay.
But I mean, the CIA and the FBI have been doing that for donkeys. Driving like pretty much drugs from like Central America and South America to like America, and that's how the crack cocaine epidemic started and the whole fucking beginning of it. It's
Yes,
like
exactly.
you
Right.
know
So
all their history. You know, they've had the fentanyl issue. You know that the fentanyl problem in America has obviously been done from them pretty much. You know, bringing it from Africa or like Central America countries. It's insane. You know, if you look at the fentanyl, and especially in today, when you look at like the fentanyl problem in America, that's so fucking bad. That's killing millions of people. You know, at the moment, it's absolutely insane. Did you hear the story about that in a party? I think it was a party that happened. These kids were taking some fentanyl tablets, and one of the kids died, and the family members got so pissed off of that, and they were so scared the fact that they could, you know, someone could get fentanyl tablets because of that, and it was in a fucking college dorm. It was in a college fucking that
crazy.
happened,
That's
you
so
know.
sad. That's
I know, right?
awful. But yeah, the CIA has been doing this stuff for a very long time. The FBI as well. And the interesting thing though is that a lot of these militia groups that the FBI was infiltrating under PatCon, they all had ties to the CIA, drug running, weapons running for the Contras during Iran Contra. So you have to wonder like what was going on here. So the FBI is infiltrating these groups, and we don't know too much about PatCon because a lot of the groups that they infiltrated, they weren't able to get these guys to do a terrorism, so they just kind of embedded themselves within these militia groups to the point where we get to where we are today, where what we learned in the case that I was covering, the one I'm doing the documentary on, the FBI is running almost all of these militia groups, the 3%ers. They have FBI informants heading almost every state chapter. Okay, they're all we've learned now too. The vice president of the Oath Keepers was an FBI informant. We learned that the FBI had 8 informants in the Proud Boys. We know that the Enrique Tarrio, the leader of the Proud Boys, was a prolific FBI informant. And so you just start asking yourself, like,
And
okay,
also Antifa, you know, Black Lives Matter.
yes,
There are another groups that have
they're
been
in all
infiltrated. You
of
know.
them. All of them.
Hmm.
Yes. And so it's just kind of crazy. And yeah, I think that they really have been emboldened though, because they got away with a lot of the excesses in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And then after 9/11, we had the global war on terror. They kicked that off. We got the Patriot Act that expands the powers of
Which
the
is
national
absolutely
security state.
unconstitutional, and you know, which
Oh,
pretty
yeah.
much, you know, brought the whole civilian state and trying to turn, you know, United States into some kind of Orwellian country,
Right.
which is not good at all. And I mean, also not just that, but the war on, like you're saying, the war on terror, Libya or Syria war that were
Yes.
unlawful, you know, killing innocent Muslims, you know, Americans
Mhm.
died in that. And especially with the war that's going on in Ukraine right now with all the taxpayers' money, that is just, it's absolutely insane. It's incredible, you know. By the way, did you hear the news today, Christina, that actually a missile from the media is accusing Russia of launching a missile into Moldova, but apparently it was another freaking Ukrainian missile that went
Oh
into
my God, another
Moldova
one?
by accident, you know.
You're
Well, I
kidding.
think I think
What?
President Zelensky is pretty much doing it, you know, to try and get a war with Russia, but you know. Um so Christina, what other facts would you like people to know in your documentary, and what are you also hoping to achieve with it?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, so I guess I will be covering Brandon's story, right? Brandon spent 18 months in prison. He got out. He was having trouble getting a job, getting a bank account, even though he's been totally cleared, right? And a jury said, hey, he didn't do what the government told it or said that he did. He was framed. He's an innocent man. You don't go back to being whole. Like the government doesn't have to pay for your apartment that they destroyed. They don't have to reimburse you or compensate you for the almost 2 years you spent in prison. They don't have to fix your car that they cut up and ripped the paneling off of, and destroyed. Like, it's there's a process of like rebuilding your life. And then when you're applying for jobs, everyone has a human resources department. They go and they look you up and they see, oh, conspiracy to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, domestic terrorism, blah,
Oh,
blah, 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 blah. And so
those, you know,
even if
industries
you've
that.
been found totally not guilty, you're free, you're acquitted, they say that you were innocent and the government tried to frame you. It doesn't matter. When you're applying for jobs, people see that they know who you are, they know your name, and you can't
and
get
that
work.
comes from the Patriot Act and the civilians, thing. And if you think about it, a lot of people say the social credit systems can't score, society is coming. But if you think about it, we've kind of been in a social credit score system, for almost 20 years now since the Patriot Act.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, it's just behind the scenes. We don't have it in the open like in China with Sesame Credit. Ours is all done behind the scenes, but the infrastructure is there. Okay. We see it with cancel culture and all of the manifestations of that. People getting deplatformed everywhere, debanked. Like, I'm not allowed on PayPal, I'm not allowed on
Tell
Subscribestar,
us about
Patreon.
your story about PayPal. I looked at that and I was thinking, what was that about?
I have no idea why I was banned from PayPal. It happened the day after I interviewed Brandon on my channel, which is interesting. That was the first time I talked to him before I had filmed for our documentary or anything. It was my first time speaking to him since he got out of prison and kind of talking about what happened, how the FBI framed him, what he's doing now. And literally the next day, I'm banned by PayPal for life.
It is absolutely ridiculous what PayPal is doing, and they should never do that.
Yeah, so you get punished for being a journalist, whatever. It is what it is, though, and it doesn't surprise me. So what my goal with the documentary, though, is to really, I think that there's a misperception in our country, in America, right, where people tend to believe what you could call like the experts, right, or people in authority, like, and people
they're
are
not
waking
experts.
up to this,
they're pretty much like puppets, who are controlled by the
exactly. Yes, but there's this perception, though, among a large segment of Americans that, like, if the federal government says somebody was a terrorist and arrest them, that they wouldn't do that unless that was true, right? Like, they have this belief in like the American legal system, which they believe to be fair, and they don't understand
it's not fair. It's not
fair.
Well, one thing is, it's not just America's, legal system. I mean, in New Zealand, we've got a crappy legal system. Australia's legal system is corrupt. A lot of Western Europe's legal system, and Britain's fucking legal system, especially with the monarchy, is just. Don't even get me started with it. It's just, especially the way that how they defend pedophiles, and the fact that drug dealers, people who smoke weed will get fucking more jail time than a fucking pedophile is just insane.
Yeah, I mean, my goodness. So I think that part of this has to do with Hollywood. All right, like there are TV shows like Law and Order, CSI, whatever, and there's these Hollywood movies, and they kind of make it look like the legal system is based on like forensics and science and the law, and that
exactly.
If you've seen Law and Order, the cops are always the good guys and they're out to get the bad guys, and it's like it's never like, oh, wait a second, these people all have an agenda. Like a U.S. attorney, a prosecutor has cases assigned to them, and they want to make a name for themselves. They don't care if you're innocent or guilty.
It also comes down to the fact how when like Carl Rittenhouse was basically like just defending himself, and it goes into the fact, of how people are using social media to just try and destroy, the whole innocent before proven guilty.
Yep.
And if you think about it, that comes from, Operation Mockingbird, which is another thing used by the CIA, which a lot of the United States media is used to brainwash the masses. And it also, they've been using Operation Mockingbird also for Hollywood to change the American culture, destroy the nuclear family, and to bring in this type of society where get innocent before proven guilty is not going to exist. And it frightens me. It's not just America who's been affected by it. You know, Britain's been affected by it. New Zealand's been affected by it. You know, Australia's been affected by it. You know, this insane brainwashing, especially, you know, with all these countries that are trying to look up as America, you know, as this, you know, freedom-loving country, when in fact it's not been that freedom country that the founding fathers wanted. Because if the founding fathers was alive, they would be looking at America and thinking, what the fuck is this shit? We didn't fucking, you know, get rid of Britain for this, you know? And it's just absolutely insane.
Oh my gosh, that's so true. But there are still people though who are blind and who 100% look at something like Law and Order and believe in the system, you know. And so what I want to show with my documentary, I want to show people just how much the legal system you know, is designed to protect the powerful and the government, and how much the judge intervened to protect the FBI, right? To protect what the government did here, and really just stepping on people's rights. It's insane that the courts get that kind of discretion. You know, what Judge Yonker did, I think, was disgusting. In the retrial of the other two guys, that became even more obvious, where he was outright saying in front of the jury that the defense had a crap line of questioning, or a crap theory, which was FBI entrapment, and it was the truth. But saying that in front of the jury, the judge is supposed to be impartial. And so when the
and he's supposed to be fair, you know, and this is why in the United States, I saw a very good post, you know, which was saying that all judges should follow the Constitution. They should.
Right, they should have to, but they have this discretion and this leeway to kind of do stuff like this. And I've never seen anything like that. I was a paralegal for several years. I've never seen a judge
What's a paralegal? What's a paralegal?
A paralegal is somebody that works at a law firm and helps assist lawyers. So you don't have a law degree or anything like that, but you do a lot of the work. But I've never seen anything like that, where a judge would do that and just so openly be favoring one side. He at one point limited the defense cross-examination to 25 minutes, but he let the prosecutors go on and on and on. So if you have a time limit, you can't get to everything because you have to lay a foundation first. A legal foundation, meaning you have to ask one question, get somebody to respond, then ask another and another, and lead up to the point where you want to get to. And they know that. They know that's how the process works. So by limiting it to 25 minutes, you're cutting it off right before you can get to the really good stuff. And that's what the judge did. And it was so obvious and so transparent. Even the left-wing media reported on that. Like, oh, the judge is imposing these time limits on the defense, but not the prosecution. The next day, he removed the time limits. But by that point, it's already too late. You already ruined their cross-examination of two key people here. And so it's just little things like this that I want to expose in my documentary. I want people to see how corrupt the FBI is, how corrupt the legal system is, the judicial system. I want people to understand too, just that how easy it is to have your entire life destroyed. What happened to Brandon and Daniel and all the other guys in this case could literally happen to any one of us. If they can do it to Brandon and he never committed a crime, of course they could do it to you or me. And that's why it's important. People have to care about these things, but they don't.
It's no different to Julian Assange, you know, and Albrecht too.
Exactly. Oh my God, right? Yeah. And so I want people to understand that. And then I sort of want to we need to call for the FBI to be abolished, or at the very least, we need to have oversight hearings into the FBI's confidential human source program. So these informants that they're using, how much are they paying them? Who are these people? What's the vetting? I know that they've stated like it's $530 million they spend on these FBI informants. In the case that I'm looking at in particular, they were giving these guys envelopes of cash like the fucking mafia.
Exactly. And you know, there are some states, there are some police in America, like some of the police industries in America have the fucking budget of like the Ukrainian army and the North Korean army. Have you seen that? It's absolutely insane.
Oh, that's nuts. That's crazy. They just have way too much power, and there's no accountability. There's no transparency. Nobody is looking at what the CIA, what the FBI is doing and making sure that they're not doing illegal things. I mean, we know what the CIA was doing with things like MK Ultra, like human experimentation, the
And
worst
just like what Kanye
violations.
came out and mentioned about how one of his Hollywood stuff, Hollywood, was it his manager?
It was his personal trainer, Harley
Personal
Pasternak.
trainer, was pretty much using MK Ultra to pretty much
Yes.
troll people, and not just that, all of the MK Ultra stuff in the history,
Oh,
before,
yeah.
it's absolutely insanity.
Yeah, truly it is. So I want people to see that. I want to give these guys a voice because no one cares about them. If you're a working class white guy in America, you're basically no one cares about you. No one wants to speak for you. No one wants to give you a voice. Oh, you're a domestic extremist, blah 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 blah. So, no, I want to be a voice for these people and I want their story to be told, and I also want people to understand how easily it could happen to you. You know, you happen to be in a group chat, you get invited to an event, you show up, and you're basically at the wrong place at the wrong time, and all of a sudden you're now caught up in this FBI investigation, a sprawling investigation where the FBI calls you a terrorist. That is what happened to Brandon. He got invited to like 3 of these events. He didn't hardly know anybody. He wasn't, part of the militia group. He just showed up to train because this was during 2020 while cities were being burned down. There was
Yeah, and
rioting,
destroyed by
looting.
Black Lives Matter, and also a few police
Yes.
officers died in that, and remember all the
Yep.
damage that was done, and especially the
Exactly.
Black Lives Matter, organizations lynching money off people, and especially one of them, saying they hate white people, saying that white
Yep.
people should do this, when in fact, though, one of them was living in one of the whitest areas with the money that they siphoned, off
Of
that.
course, millions of dollars. Yeah, exactly. But so, of course, while that's going on, like, Brandon was looking at this stuff and he's like, oh, wow, I want to learn how to use my gun better in case I have to protect and defend myself or my family or, have to protect somebody else from, having their store looted or something. He just wanted to learn defensive training. So he showed up. They were taught like medical training, defensive training. All of this is legal. Okay. And he showed up like 3 times, and he didn't know that when he showed up the first time in July after accepting an invitation from an online chat group, he didn't know he was walking into an active FBI terrorism investigation. So just imagine that could happen to you. All of us have these chats that we're in, and Telegram, Discord, Facebook, wherever, where there's tons of rooms, people are talking, they're posting memes, and you get invited to some family friendly event, and you could be walking into this. And that is why it's so important that it's literally that easy for the FBI to try to frame you and throw you in a cage for the rest of your life.
Christina, if you were let's say you were the president of the United States and you had very big power, you had the ability to do this, how would you change the United States legal system once you abolish the FBI and CIA and the other corrupt industries, and also getting rid of the Federal Reserve, which is another thing that needs to go?
Yes.
How would you make it fair? How would you make it transparent? And what would you replace it with?
Well, that's a very good question. I think that part of me wants to say, oh, we just go back to like what the founding fathers envisioned for our country, which was not this big federal government. They understood that like power corrupts people. I would say you need to move it back to local stuff, right? State and local. You don't need to have an FBI. Like, we don't need to have the FBI has 72 fusion centers with the Department of Homeland Security, state, local, federal law enforcement all working together. Why do we need that? Why do we need
All of that
DHS,
taxpayers'
FBI?
money, all of that taxpayer
Yes,
money going to them, when in fact that could be used for healthcare, for what social
exactly. For
development, for transport
infrastructure.
development. And it's such a shame that the United States of America, pretty much has something called the Federal Reserve, that is using FBI's money to fucking, go to these illegal wars, and taxpayers' money when it could be being used for something else. And as an American citizen,
Exactly.
it just makes you furious.
Oh, exactly. It really does, and it's sad to see because it gets worse and worse every single year. The gap of wealth between the rich and the poor, that gets bigger and bigger each year as they continue to consolidate more and more power into the top 1%. And you look at how much they own versus regular people. I mean, I'm 34 years old. I know a lot of younger people. I know a lot of Generation
You don't
Z.
look 34. You look
Oh,
like,
thank
you're
you.
27. You actually
Aw,
look
that's
8 years
very
younger,
sweet. Thank you. But like these younger people are totally priced out of the housing market. Like I talk to young people who believe they'll never be able to own a home, and that was always sold to us, right? As like
Same
the
thing here in
American
New Zealand. New Zealand, we're
yes.
facing the same problem, especially, in Australia too, and a lot in the West. A lot of people my age are not going to be able to own a home because the housing market in the West is pretty much been screwed over by inflation, by high
Yep.
interest rates, and that pretty much has to do with the corrupt banking system that has made it that way. And pretty much, people taking off mortgages, which they thought which is a good idea, which really wasn't a good idea because the globalists, made a banking system that was to corrupt it like that and fuck people over.
Yeah, exactly. I think it is a really a global phenomenon that we're seeing, but that's I look at that and I think, the country is not going to last long if it's like that. They say, right? Like, oh, you're going to own nothing and be happy,
Do
the great
do
reset.
Do you think so? There's been one thing that's been going on a lot at the moment. Do you think so? Before I answer this question, are you still a fan of Donald Trump?
Yes and no. It depends on the
So let's say this 2024 is going to be a very big year. Obviously, you've got election fraud, which is still being done. The Republicans haven't
Mm.
really done enough to stop that because
They
there are
haven't
a lot
done
of
anything.
fines. Do you think that America come 2024, do you think that Donald Trump will come into office in 2024, do what is done to save America? Or do you think that we're going to see the same thing that we saw in 2020, where America, with the craziness with election fraud? And do you think we're perhaps going to see, which a lot of people and a lot of, philosophers have prophesized, America splitting, like New Hampshire and Texas and Florida going their own ways and other states. And if that was to happen, do you think that would be a good idea? And do you think that these states could be fine on their own?
Well, that's a very complex question. I'll take the first part first. Do I think that Donald Trump is going to be, a hero or something? I think that he had a lot of bad people that surrounded him and advised him the first time, right? He was surrounded by snakes, people like Jared Kushner, Henry Kissinger. These are not good people. And I think that he missed a lot of opportunities. I think that he could have done a lot more. He had the power, but the problem with the Republican Party is every time they have power, they never use it. The left always does, and they'll abuse it. When we have power, it's like we don't do anything. Oh yeah, we got tax cuts. Oh, whoop de doo. Thanks a lot, but not real reform. Okay. I think that he would have to clean out the Republican Party first, and I look at people he's kind of promoted like Ronna McDaniel and Kevin
Personally, I
McCarthy.
don't think Donald
Holy
Trump is.
shit!
I used to be a fan of him, but I'm not anymore.
Well,
I
and he
don't.
did the January 6th political prisoners. Why not pardon them? But you're gonna give pardons to like
I
rap
know.
rap
And,
stars? Really?
and why
Okay,
didn't he?
no.
One of the reasons why I stopped supporting him, Christina, because he didn't pardon Assange, he didn't pardon
Right.
Albright. He didn't
Yep.
do enough. He didn't fire Fauci. He did
Nope.
Operation Warp Speed. He continued the war in Yemen, which is one of the one of the worst, human genocides in history. And
Yep.
also he bombed, Somalia more than any president did. So it's
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
So
And
I don't see
as you're saying about the other question I asked you,
Yeah, so I don't see him being the savior now. As far as what could happen in 2024, one good thing I've seen is Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter. I do think that perhaps maybe, just maybe, it'll be run a little bit fairer there. Like we just saw with the Twitter files that just came out, that obviously the FBI, the Biden administration, they
yeah.
were working
Mm-hmm.
with Twitter, the DNC as well, to suppress stories that were unfavorable to them and all of that. And we know that,
And also override, the 2020 election, and override free
yes,
speech, and And by the way, just to let you know, today there was actually a Congress member, I think, who actually said that they think that one of the governments should take control of Twitter. And I feel like there's a bit of conspiracy theory going on. Could Elon Musk get assassinated? And if that happens, Twitter might, who knows? It could happen, especially when Elon Musk, the other day mentioned, that if I commit suicide, it's not true.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's disturbing, but like that could be a good thing if he's still in control of it in 2024. The problem with the Republican Party, though, is that we didn't see what really matters in 2022. Like they still do this cucked rhino stuff that no one cares about. Like no one wants to talk about these dorky things that they try to promote. Like they don't have anybody speaking to what working class people care about. Like, how are you going to make my life materially better? And I don't just want like gas to be cheaper. I want to know what you're going to do to bring back manufacturing jobs in this country, what you're going to do to secure the border, what you're going to do to secure elections, what you're going to do to root out the corruption in the federal government, what you're going to do to go after the FBI. Like they don't talk about that stuff. It's
Or
just
what are
nonsense.
you going to do to go after the Federal Reserve?
Right. You'll never hear that from the Republican Party.
And you
So,
never heard that from Trump, Well, I mean, Donald Trump said he did promise to do it like in 100 days, but nope.
No, it didn't happen.
After 100 days,
Steve Bannon has said that recently, but he's the only one I've seen in Trump's circle who actually said the Federal Reserve specifically, and called that out. But so I think that if something does happen, right, in 2024 where you see a split, I don't see that being a good thing. And here's why. I think that if the country had some kind of secession, right, or split where the southern states were the Republicans and the blue took the other half of the country. I think that leaves us wide open for China and Russia to take over. And, we just learned recently China apparently has police stations around the world. What is going on with that? And I think it's,
it is pretty crazy, isn't it? Well, I mean, you got the United States government. You got the United States government, that puts military bases around the world. That's just as bad. It's absolutely
CIA black sites all around the world. But truly, it is remarkable and it's interesting. And I kind of see, I've been a longtime follower of Anatoly Golitsyn. So Golitsyn was a KGB defector back in the day. He put out 2 books, one called Perestroika Deception, another called New Lies for Old, where he talked about the long-range Soviet strategy. And one of the things he said was that there was going to be a fake Russia-China split, and then you would see them reunite in a closed fist to try to smash America in the West. What they were doing when they said they were liberalizing, right? They had this, what he called a fake fall of communism in Russia, where supposedly the KGB is gone and now we're going to liberalize, we're going to be more like a liberal democracy, blah blah blah. It wasn't the fall of communism, it wasn't the fall of the Soviet Union. Golitsyn says it was simply a restructuring and putting them more in the background, that they were learning from what was going on in America, that if you give the illusion of freedom, that's actually better. We should be in the background more instead of being the iron fist in front of your face. We should be more of a velvet glove. And so it was this kind of restructuring, and the same thing with China, the fake fight with these different communist countries. No, they're all united. Behind the scenes, they're all working together. So now I think that if we had some kind of secessionist movement in America or a breakup of America, balkanization of it, I think that's exactly what the Soviet countries would want. And I think that China would very quickly move in, and same with Russia, and you wouldn't have the same kind of strong United States that you need to combat that.
So, Christina, talking about that, how long do you want to keep going on for? Do you want to talk about your life story, or no, you don't have enough time for that?
We can get into my life story real quick if you like before I head out. So it's not too long.
Tell me about your life story. And I was watching one of your videos where you said that, you're arrested when you're younger and your mum kicked you out of your house, kicked you out of the house, and like she pretty much, stole your identity, which is absolutely insane. How did you manage to, overcome those challenges in life And what was, your path to Christianity? What led you on the path to becoming a Christian? And what was the one, quote that really, that you would wake up every day and kept you going, because to go through that stress is not easy for everybody. What was that one quote that kept you going in life all the time?
Okay, so my life story, I mean, my parents divorced when I was 2, so my sister and I went back and forth between my dad's and my mother's, but my mom ended up getting primary custody of us. So I grew up in South Florida and West Palm Beach, and my mother is, I've forgiven her, so I don't want to be too mean, but she is a narcissist. She is bipolar. She's kind of like has, sort of these episodes, right? You could call it manic episodes or whatever, but she would get very, very aggressive and very nasty. And so my sister also has bipolar manic depression as well. So when I was very young, like my sister ran away when she was 15, and she'd try to kill herself all the time. Like we had to hide the scissors in the bathroom when I was like really young. I had to kind of be aware of this stuff, and it almost felt like I was the older sister or something in some ways, because she would be like laughing one minute, crying the next. And I could see that there was like something wrong with her, but I didn't know how to help her. And just seeing her like act out in different ways and having to be aware of like things like not leaving scissors in the bathroom where she could lock herself in there and get to them. So my mom, as I got a little bit older, she started drinking more, and she's became sort of an alcoholic. And I started working when I was 14 years old to pay for my own things. And my mom just was how she was. She threw me out when I was like 12. I had to go to the Chinese restaurant at the top of the street and call like my friend's dad to come get me. There was one time where she'd done that she threw me out after like beating me or whatever, and I called the police. And that was a fucking mistake, because my mom was very charming, like all narcissists are, like very like uh
Yeah, that's true.
superficial charm, right? So this cop came to the house, and she was just watching her like be so smooth, and how her personality changed. She went from being like a raging, screaming uh asshole to, as soon as this cop showed up, "Oh, hi, officer. Oh, my daughter's just out of control. She just didn't want to listen to me. And I'm so sorry that she called you and that you had to waste your time to come here." And I'm just like sitting there watching her put on this show for this guy, and the
Wow,
superficial charm. And the
that's not
police
normal.
officer he didn't care at all what I had to say. Nobody believed me. Like everybody thought she was so nice and so great because she was able to do that. And she ended up like walking this cop to his car, and he like got her phone number because he wanted to take her out on a date. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, well, maybe because she was being so nice to me in front of the cop, I was thinking, well, maybe she's like over it, maybe everything will be fine. And I remember her coming right back in the house after the cop left, and just seeing the mask come off again, and she going right back to being like, "Don't you ever fucking do that to me again, you fucking bitch." And I was like, oh shit. So I learned from like a really young age that like no one was going to believe me. She would gaslight people. So yeah, it didn't surprise me. And then when I was 17, when I was in high school, she threw me out of the house. I was actually at work, and I came home. I had a friend like drive me home because she didn't pick me up that night. I came home and all my things were in the front yard, and I was locked out of the house. So I had to drop out of high school. I had to sleep on couches. and had to learn to survive. And at the same time, she stole my identity. She ran up like utility bills in my name. She tried to get credit cards in my name. She tried to take out a mortgage in my name. And
that is absolutely insane.
Yeah.
Wow.
It is, like, she's nuts. And it was just like a crazy position to be in, like when that's your introduction to life, right? Like most people, not everybody, but most people have parents who care about them and kind of want to help, like, prepare them for life in the world, help them go to college or whatever. Like, my my experience is being thrown out of the house as a teenager, having to drop out of high school, get my GED, and survive and just start working. Luckily, I was working as a hostess at a restaurant, so they let me become like a waiter, and so I was able to work doubles and kind of like make some money. But yeah, and then of course having your identity stolen, so you're starting out at the very bottom, sleeping on couches. You're already kind of in a bad position, and when you're down so low, it's kind of hard to dig yourself out of that, right? To save money. I didn't have a car. I didn't have anyone I could go to for help. And then of course having her steal my identity, so I start out with like fucking negative credit score. And I tried to kind of fix my credit, and they said that the only way I'd be able to do that was if I pressed charges against her, because she knew my social security number. So it was very difficult to prove identity theft. And being the person I was, I didn't want to press charges against my mother. So, of course, I just was like, oh, I'll just deal with this myself. Yeah. So, but I got very lucky too. I feel that God put different people in my life, at different times to kind of help me. And I'm also, in a way, very grateful for that experience. I think that that made me really strong. You don't know what you're capable of until you're put in the position where you're going to sleep on the street that night, or you're not going to eat unless you figure something out. And it makes you very tough and very resilient. And I think it also makes people humble as well. Like, I don't have a sense of entitlement that a lot of younger women seem to have. So I think
A
that's,
lot of even men too. Both men
yeah,
and women are
they're
very
the
spoiled.
coddled generation. Yeah, whose
And
parents, like,
there's a
oh my
lot of
goodness.
people in this generation who do even worse things to their parents, and they don't even get kicked out. They don't even get, put on the street. They get away with it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, I got very lucky though. I had some people that came into my life and helped me. And that I don't regret any of that. I'm glad that kind of happened because I think it builds character too. And I think everybody should experience like homelessness once, just so you know what that's like, right? Because I think a lot of people see homeless people and they assume that you're a drug addict or that you're mentally ill or something like that. Like, oh yeah, like you see them and you don't want to help them, you want to stay away from them, and you just assume they're an alcoholic or they're a junkie or something, and that's why they're homeless. That's why their life is like that. It's because they made the wrong decisions or something. But really, I think that I've read that um, 2/3 of all Americans are literally living paycheck to paycheck. So you're one medical emergency away or one job loss away from being homeless yourself. And so I think, there are people living in cars right now, and it's not because they're an addict or an alcoholic or that they're mentally ill or something. It's literally sometimes due to just life circumstances. And so I think that really the reason that I am such a strong Christian is because I'm able to recognize that I had a lot of blessings in my life, and that the really bad things could have happened to me, but they didn't, you know.
It's cool that you were able to overcome that, and man, that is such a big challenge. So, Christina, before we go, before you finish off, is there anything else you would like to say?
Oh no, that's about it. If you guys want to hear more about my life story and stuff, I have a lot of videos up on my YouTube channel where I talk about it in more detail. Um, but that's about it. And then you can find me on my YouTube channel, Radixverum, exactly as it's spelled here. I'm on Odyssey as well.
Well, thank you, Christina, for coming on my show. It was an absolute pleasure having you.
Oh, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
And I just want to say to everybody, thank you for joining the Welsh Republic Podcast, episode number 80 today. Make sure you check out Christina's work, and when her documentary comes out, I definitely recommend it. Have a nice day, everybody. Thank you for joining the show. Take care.